If you listen to any intelligent drum and bass release from the 90s, you're going to hear these amazing ethereal ambient pads. Now, it's no surprise that digital romplers at the time provided the sound source material for a lot of these, but samplers were often still king, and they offered some unique sound manipulation techniques that just sequencing a rompler alone wouldn't do. So let's take a listen to a couple examples so I can give you an idea of the sound that we're going to recreate today by using a sampler. We all know about this first one here where we simply sample playing a chord from your favorite synth. Then we take that, throw it into a sampler, and when you play it back, you get that surreal parallel harmony sound. This is unique to samplers, but we can take it a step further than this. Very simply, we're going to record a single note instead of a full chord, and then bounce that to audio. Now with our single note here bounced down to audio, as mentioned, we can throw it into our sampler and loop it up, and we can begin playing with it right away. Now, you'll probably know where I'm going with this, but our trick here is that we're gonna play a chord with the sampler device once we have everything looped up. And this is gonna create some very interesting effects, but let's go ahead and just play around with this one for right now. Also, a very quick pro tip here if you're a Bitwig user, make sure you go into the inspector panel and increase the voices for the sampler device. That's going to allow us to play a chord. Let's play that chord, and this is where the magic begins to happen. If you look very closely, you'll see what's happening with the sampler is when we play a chord, we're triggering the sample playback head at different pitches. And what this means is each voice will scrub through that sample at a different speed and pitch. And if we have it looped up, some of those voices will then overlap, creating a lot of really nice incidentals and textures. Something you could also do is change the loop mode to a ping pong loop. And so some of the voices are just going to bounce back and play the sample from the end instead of going to the start. This is just another interesting and creative way to get some more texture, variation, and a little more uniqueness. And like most things in the sampler, if we simply play lower on our keyboard, it can completely change the sound and feel of that chord we're playing, like so. The longer you hold out that chord as well, the more texture and variations you're gonna get. And then you can do things like start to play around with the filter on the sampler and use something like an LFO to modulate the filter cutoff. And this is where everything really starts to come together. Now here what I'm doing is just playing a little higher on the keyboard to hear what it would sound like transposed up, but also playing around with the pitch for the sampler device itself. Again, just some different vibes and feels with that single sample. Another thing you can explore is changing the voicings on the chord itself. So if you play the root notes in your chord relatively together, and then you play like a 7th and a 9th transposed up, those are going to scrub through much quicker, as you'll see right here. So another tip is just playing with the voicings of the chord that you're playing in the sampler device. Now I can mess around with that in something like a multi-sample. In Bitwig, you'll see I'm transposing up the final note in that chord way up, and then we could do that with the root note as well, right? We could take it down a semitone or a tone or multiple. But playing with those voicings in the chord is another way to just get some great variations. And again, visualize it in Bitwig. You can see that upper note just scrubbing through much quicker. Now the final thing I'm doing here is just basically resampling. So playing the chord in the sampler, bouncing that down to audio, then throwing that into another sampler. We've basically resampled that chord, and we can now play it with that parallel harmony. So this process of recording in a single note, playing a chord in the sampler, bouncing that down, resampling that, getting it back in a sampler, that's where you're going to get all that texture, and you can begin to play around with looping this new version of that sound you're creating, and then sky's the limit from here. It's all about the creative process.